He still looks like he's 15, Nick, but I will say when he's working out, and there's a workout montage in this movie for some reason. I don't still understand why.
Because he's not 15. He really wants you to know that.
I mean, he has definitely got that like shredded cheerleader body in high school, and it did make me want to install some sort of rope that I could climb for workouts in my apartment. I'm still working that out with the manager. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the RT After Show for a very special episode. Not because I'm here subbing in for my dear friend Jacqueline Coley. It's because the movie we're talking about, yes, we finally have an Uncharted movie to talk about, and that's exactly what we're doing here today. The blockbuster film that had the biggest opening of the year so far at the box office, starring Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland.
Both you turn your keys clockwise at the same time.
Thanks a lot. You almost got me killed. Clockwise, silly. Well, it was 50-50, so I made a guess.
Clearly.
But what do the critics and the audience actually have to say about it? And we're going to get into that as just the tip of the iceberg. A whole lot of deep dive and burning questions answered here. So yes, we have the pleasure of a very esteemed panel joining me today. First up is a critic from the Daily Beast, Nick Schager. Nick, welcome to the show. You've played Uncharted. You were a big Uncharted game fan from back in the day. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, I have played all three of the main Uncharted titles. And so like a lot of people, I think, had some expectations going in for the new movie. Whether those were met or not, I think are open for discussion, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get to that.
That's why we are here, my friend. And we also have the host of Beyond the Trailer, Grace Randolph is here. Grace.
Yeah, it really wasn't on my radar until the casting controversy of people being like, that's not my Nathan Drake. Where's Nathan Fillion? Right? That's when I started to notice it because I've never played the game. And the question also, could Tom Holland, front another franchise for Sony? And we got our answer this weekend.
We're going to talk about a whole lot, and this is a very excitable panel when we talk about any film, but particularly a movie as big and is talked about as Uncharted. It's directed by Ruben Fleischer. It stars, like I said, Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, amongst others, and it is an adaptation of the best-selling PlayStation video game that was first launched back in 2007, I believe. The Tomatometer score currently has Uncharted as rotten, 40%, but, and there's always a but, the audience score is 90%. So critics and audiences not seeing eye to eye on Uncharted thus far. Its opening was impressive. Domestically, $51 million it's hauled in so far with a worldwide total of $139 million and counting. It's the biggest opening for a film this year. Again, it's just February, but it's still the trophy can be held by Uncharted as of today. The critics' consensus is it's a promisingly cast but misleadingly titled. Uncharted mines its best-selling source material to produce a disappointing echo of superior adventure films. So, Nick, I know that you are an Uncharted player from back in the day, as you said. So did you feel like this was more of a Tom Holland adventure movie, or did it feel like the video game that you played so many times?
No, I think that it is primarily, I think first and foremost, if we're going to talk about it, it has to be talked about as a Tom Holland movie. I mean, the property is, I think, well known amongst gamers. It's certainly been a successful franchise for Sony and for the PlayStation. But I don't think the average moviegoer is particularly knowledgeable about the Uncharted franchise. I think movie people have been talking about this franchise and adapting it for many years. But I think if you went out on the street and asked the average person if they'd heard of Uncharted, I don't think it has that sort of level of name brand recognition. So I really think that the movie's performance, at least, has to do with Tom Holland beginning, middle, and end with a little bit of Mark Wahlberg and Antonio Banderas thrown in. But certainly its performance has to do with him, and it has to do, I think, a lot with Spider-Man.
I like that. It's like the game was just successful enough to get a movie, but not so successful that it would hold the movie back.
Well, I mean, look, the game series is immensely popular. I mean, I remember, at a certain point them bundling it with PlayStations and stuff. It was a notable title, but it's not Halo or even Resident Evil or something like that. I don't think it has that level of recognition. And that's no slam on the games. It's just this movie was sold, I think, rightly as a Tom Holland vehicle. First and foremost, all you have to do is look at the poster to see his face is half the poster. That's what they were riding on. And it obviously was a smart strategy from a marketing standpoint, because the movie performed, I think, again, I really think it didn't have as much to do with Uncharted fans coming out. Certainly, I'm sure they did. But I think this had to do with drawing in an audience that knew who Tom Holland was and who were at this very moment in time extremely into the idea of Tom Holland in a big action adventure film. And
I would say the team up of Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg was one of the heavily advertised aspects of this movie. And so I think that having two stars like that we've seen in action movies, and I'm lumping comic book movies into that, was a big plus. So overall, if we look at it, Grace, do you buy into the Tomatometer score, or do you side more with the audience score? 40% on the Tomatometer, but super fresh with the audiences.
I am one of the rare fresh tomatoes that this movie received. I don't agree with the 40%. I think it should be more, maybe around 60, 70. I think it should, maybe just squeak behind to the fresh category, right? Even if it was a little below, I think that would be respectable. Here's the thing. I don't think that Uncharted is like an amazing movie. It's not an Indiana Jones. But I think that the chemistry between Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg is electric in the movie. And I thought that the action sequences, and perhaps because I had not already seen them in the video games, Nick, were very cool to me. Like, I thought that the pirate ships sequence at the end there was like, sure, it was a little Pirates of the Caribbean, but they were in the air. They were flying through the air. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a very fun movie.
Nick, did Rotten Tomatoes, as far as the Tomatometer, do they have it right? 40% rotten. Is this a rotten movie in your eyes?
Well, in my eyes, it is. I don't really think the movie works in any grand sense, certainly on its own terms. I think, like a lot of people, and as I wrote for the Daily Beast, I think it really is almost like a third generation version of an Indiana Jones film that is really playing off the audience's knowledge of and desire for a lot of cliches that we've seen many times before. That said, the movie isn't incompetent. It certainly knows what it's doing, and it knows how to go through those motions. I think the biggest negative is a combination of, to my mind, Holland not really being cast properly. I mean, I think he drives the movie, but I don't think he is a great Nathan Drake. I don't think him and Wahlberg have some really electric chemistry, and I don't think the set pieces are particularly exciting or original other than the initial sequence. So I don't think the movie really works, but I do think that there is something to be said for new generations of moviegoers wanting to see things repackaged for themselves in slightly new versions. And if you put that together with a star like Tom Holland, who is at this, as I said, I don't think it can be stressed enough that, like, Tom Holland is the biggest movie star in the world at this precise moment because Spider-Man is so enormously successful. And I think there was a lot of residual goodwill and a lot of residual interest from Spider-Man. I mean, it's the #3 movie in the country right now. So people are still itching for Tom Holland. And that, plus a familiar Indiana Jones-ish thing, was enough to overcome the fact that I think, in general, if you release this movie in the summer, it doesn't do as well.
Yeah, and oh, by the way, Spider-Man No Way Home is also the third highest grossing domestic film of all time now, I believe. So, Grace, did you feel like Tom Holland was Nathan Drake? And do you feel like he was too young to be this adventurer? Was that the perfect casting for him? And also Mark Wahlberg. I mean, I know you like their chemistry, so I'm assuming that you thought that they were two solid casting choices.
I think that neither one of them has any range, but they're very good at what they do. So they weren't Nathan, they weren't Sully, but they were Holland and Wahlberg. And that was an excellent combination. And so I think to Nick's point about people not being particularly familiar with the game, I think there's that part of it. And then also I feel like, some people wanted Nathan Fillion, but Nathan Fillion hasn't been around for a while, So I feel like there's no actor that people were like valid choice where people were like, that should be Nathan Drake. I think that, that really also helped. And also, Tom Holland's just so likable. he was flipping around the movie. He was really giving it his all. It's hard to be upset with that.
He still looks like he's 15, Nick, but I will say when he's working out, and there's a workout montage in this movie for some reason. I don't still understand why.
Because he's not 15. He really wants you to know that.
I mean, he has definitely got that like shredded cheerleader body in high school, and it did make me want to install some sort of rope that I could climb for workouts in my apartment. I'm still working that out with the manager. But as we're talking about Tom Holland and whether it's too young for this role, we do have to consider that there's sort of a Marvel curse that he's broken here, because a lot of times you have these great big budget MCU movies that do such huge business around the world, but then the individual actors struggle outside of that realm sometimes. I mean, we've seen it with Chris Hemsworth, who I think has done some good work, but it just hasn't been nearly as widely seen. Tom Holland, is he the one that is sort of breaking that spell, Grace?
That's an excellent point. I think he's not only breaking that curse, but he's breaking the Spider-Man curse. I mean, the Spider-Man actors before him haven't really gone on to do anything either. So I would chalk it up a lot to timing, that it did come out right as everyone's still like enjoying Spider-Man No Way Home, and they just wanted more Tom Holland, as Nick said. But yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I like your story about Robert Downey Jr. patting him on the back saying you did it, and probably secretly being upset because Robert Downey Jr. hasn't even been able to do it.
Nick, do you find that to be true? First of all, is there, a curse is a strong word. Maybe a spell is more accurate with Marvel performers stepping out of that world and doing something successful, launching a franchise on their own. Has Tom Holland done it? Is he possibly the first?
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to be the first because, of course, we have Chris Pratt and we have the Jurassic World franchise, which certainly has sort of helped him do more than just Marvel stuff. But in general, it is true that most Marvel stars have been extremely successful in Marvel films, but then that Marvel stardom doesn't necessarily translate to standalone movie stardom. And I think we have a sort of complicated issue here, and it has to do, as Grace just brought up again, with timing and the fact that this movie is so on the heels of Spider-Man that it's almost connected to it. And so I think Tom Holland has the opportunity to be a standalone movie star outside of the Marvel universe. And this certainly suggests that that's true. We're going to probably find out with the next couple of movies whether or not he really is a bankable star on his own with no big property. As I said, I don't think Uncharted was the big property that propped this up. It was Holland. But I think the jury is still out. He has at least as good a chance, though, as anybody else. I mean, whether it's Chris Hemsworth or Chris Evans or even Robert Downey Jr., there hasn't been a ton of big box office success outside of those movies. And Holland is a young guy. People are extremely into him in a way that I think may allow him to transcend this situation, whether it's a curse or not. I mean, they all have enough money. I don't really feel they're very cursed, but certainly there's an opportunity here for him to set himself apart from the rest of the Marvel stars.
And you got to feel like studio execs are just pulling their hair out trying to figure out what the perfect formula is, because like you said, Nick, maybe if this movie comes out 6 months from now, it isn't as big of a hit because we're not seeing Tom Holland as Spider-Man so closely. But it's also an accomplishment to have a huge movie come out at the very end of last year and then early this year and have people put butts in seats for both of them. I mean, this is like the summer '97 where Nicolas Cage had Face Off coming out a month after he had Con Air come out, and both were very successful. And so I think it is an accomplishment, and it might portend to Tom Holland's bankability as a standalone movie star.
Tom Holland is still, right at this minute, the biggest star in Hollywood. He's, sitting on top of the throne. And I think that until proven otherwise, he and his agent can certainly go around saying, I am an immensely bankable movie star.
But it's also to Sony's credit. And Sony's going around saying, bragging, we have 2 big franchises now. And, that's the name of the game these days for any studio. What IPs do you have?
Yeah, and if you want to be another person who's a great character in an MCU movie and you want to step out on your own, probably a good idea to install that climbing rope in your apartment and just keep getting those reps and keep climbing that rope every day's gym class. Eventually, you'll have your own successful franchise. Nick, I got to ask you this. Nathan Drake, Tom Holland, that's one thing. Do we buy Tom Holland as a bartender? Could he be employed in the movie Cocktail?
I mean, look, he's no more believable, I think, as a bartender than he is doing a lot of the other things he's doing in the movie. I'm not exactly sure why 5 minutes after he's been working as a bartender, he's doing all sorts of heroic things with what seems to be zero training, other than
he did train in his apartment.
Yeah, he once broke in somewhere with his brother when he was a kid, and he's worked out a lot, so he's immediately ready to be, I mean, how many times does he sort of, leapfrog off a wall to avoid bad guys and whatnot? I mean, he's basically been doing parkour classes in his spare time. So I mean, look, I think all of it's sort of silly, but I think that in that regard, I felt like he was really going for a Tom Cruise thing. I think that between the Daredevil intro, where he's immediately dangling from things and fighting bad guys in midair to, doing Cocktail to.
And it seemed to be Tom Holland a lot doing his own stunts, very much like Tom Cruise. I felt he was very Tom Cruise in this movie, even down to the height jokes, which I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and the way the movie opens, it does get you into it. And again, as a guy who didn't know he was buying a ticket to a 4DX theater to see Uncharted, I had a very quick, somewhat rude awakening as to what the water on and off button was with that opening sequence.
What did they do with the plane? How much were you moving with the plane at the beginning?
There were gusts of wind. There was jostling. I'm seeing my chiropractor later today. It was actually fun. And it was, I think, perfect for this kind of movie. I don't know that I would want to do a 4DX with like the Batman, where I'm really trying to focus on the plot and the pathos of this character as well. But for something like Uncharted, but my popcorn got knocked around, but it was a good time overall. And I would look at this movie like an Indiana Jones or a National Treasure, which, by the way, if we're going to give Tom Holland's character, Nathan Drake, crap for not having worked out a lot on camera and then suddenly doing all these stunts, Indiana Jones is in a freaking classroom and then he's just dodging boulders. So I do give him some pass that he had some sort of training for moments like these. But when we look at the movie as a whole, was there a moment for you that sort of telegraphed that this is not the movie that I wanted from the property Uncharted?
I don't think it's so much that I don't think the movie doesn't work because it's not faithful to the property. I think it's reasonably faithful in terms of both individual set pieces, the characters and their relationship, and I think the general spirit of it, which is sort of a lighthearted riff on things we already know. I mean, Uncharted is not pretending that we don't know it likes Indiana Jones. I mean, that's the whole appeal of it. Even Grace was bringing up the pirate ship and stuff. It's like, but I've seen The Mummy too. I saw The Mummy Returns. I saw that movie where they're flying around in airships and whatnot. I felt like the movie was riffing on the riffs of Indiana Jones. And to my mind, there was no reason for that other than, I think, a general lack of imagination. So you get a lot of things that are very familiar. And I think that's true of Antonio Banderas' villain, too, who's very much, I mean, he couldn't be more of a stock bad guy if you tried. And that certainly isn't going to upset anybody. But
then he was killed.
But when you've got Antonio Banderas, you got to do more than that. I mean, you had Antonio Banderas sitting right there. And I don't know. I just thought like there was a lot of missed opportunities, and he was one of the big ones.
Grace, do you feel like Antonio Banderas was wasted in this movie, or do you think that he got enough shine with his villainous character?
Well, I think if Antonio Banderas was doing really great stuff anywhere else, I'd feel that way. But he's been phoning it in for a while now, so I think that was more on Antonio Banderas than the movie. I think the big surprise is that they were like, we killed him. You thought Antonio Banderas was going to be the big villain all the way through, but he's not. And then you were like, what? And I think maybe Antonio Banderas is quite clever because nobody missed him when he was killed in the movie.
Here's what you can't do. Here's what you can't do in a movie like that is you can't have this weird subplot that Nathan gives Sully a cat to look after because he seems lonely.
That.
So you can't give me a cat and then have Antonio Banderas talking like that and not make me think of Puss in Boots. I love Puss in Boots. It's maybe the most adorable screen character in the history of film. And I was thinking, and I was imagining just Puss in Boots being the villain for the first half of this movie. So that is neither here nor there, because there is a big twist in this film. And we also get that courtesy of some great supporting characters played by Sophia Ali and Tati Gabrielle. What did you make of those performances, Grace, from the two female leads in this movie?
Well, I thought, unfortunately, both their roles were a little underwritten, particularly the love interest, because she's, I believe, a major character from the games, but she didn't feel that way. It felt, speaking of these typical movies where, unfortunately, the female characters are often rotated out. You know, Mission Impossible got called out for that, and they've been trying to fix that. I thought Tati Gabrielle, who I'm a big fan of from Sabrina, did the best she could with what she was given. But even though she killed Antonio Banderas, I felt she never really assumed the villain role from him. She still was operating like a henchwoman after that. But I respected that the movie killed her. You know, like a lot of times, like the villain is like, "I'll see you another day." But I was like, you know, this, you know, at least she got a cool ending.
Yeah, I mean, we were there. There was a toe tag involved, so I'll get your take on that, Nick. Do you feel like Sophia and Gabrielle's performance lived up to what you would have wanted to have seen from the games?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Grace, really, that, I mean, they're fine as far as it goes. It just doesn't go very far in this movie. I mean, the movie doesn't really care about either of the female characters. And I don't mean that it's horribly disrespectful or does something bad. It just finds them to be really peripheral. They could have been swapped out with any number of other actresses who could have handled these performances fine, again, because the roles are barely one-dimensional. I mean, yes, one of them's a bad guy. One of them is, you know, sort of a comrade who might or might not be working, you know, with them or against them. And they're sort of left with a big shrug. And to some extent, I think that's true of Mark Wahlberg as well. I thought they could have done a lot more with Wahlberg too. They do this thing throughout with him where they sort of tease whether or not, you know, he's really working for, you know, with Nathan or at odds with him and is going to betray him. Anyone who's played the games or has any idea that we're going to have a franchise potentially here knows, I think, that he's not the master villain. So,
well, they really telegraphed his character development. They were like, "You care more about gold than people, Sully. Gold, it's all about gold for you." And then, of course, at the end, he literally had to choose between gold and Tom Holland. But I still found it satisfying. You know, I think by the time they had that end credit sequence, I'm like, let's go. I'd love to see you. I mean, they had the quips between them were very funny, I thought.
And I actually feel like this was a turning of the page somewhat in Mark Wahlberg's career as an action star, because this was the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I saw a movie where he was overtly joking about the fact that he is getting too old for this S, to quote Danny Glover, where he's like, no, he was almost like Obi-Wan Kenobi as much as he was Luke Skywalker in this movie, where he's just like, look, I'm too old to go rescue all these. I'm too old to go running around all this stuff, kid. You do all the hard stunt work, and I'll just be the cool dashing guy in the background.
Well, he was supposed to play Nathan Drake for a while. He was originally cast and aged. And Mark, you were talking about how long they've been doing this. You know, that's how long when he was appropriate for the role. You know, Nick, do you think he would have been a better Nathan Drake?
I mean, maybe at one point. I think he's a little old now. I think, you know, really the Nathan Drake of the games is in between these two actors age-wise. And I think other people that have been floated just like Wahlberg have probably aged out at this point, right? I mean, everyone talks about Nathan Fillion, but even if you think of, you know, someone like a Bradley Cooper or someone like that who might be appropriate is too old now. I think you want someone younger. And so I get going for Tom Holland, who's going to age into the role, provided you have sequels. And now I think it's probably likely we're going to have at least one sequel, given the film's success. I just like, you know, Wahlberg, I think, is best when he really can sort of be a little cheesy. And I wanted more of that here. I mean, I wanted a little bit more of the Transformers Mark Wahlberg version rather than this one. But, you know, look, he certainly sort of fulfills his, let's say, narrative role and his box office role in terms of bringing in slightly older audiences and bridging a couple of different age demographics. And he's comfortable enough in this. I just wish that they gave him a little bit more to do. As
far as the Transformers correlation goes, you did at least get Transformers level product placement, because I feel bad for any Papa John's that may actually exist in Spain, because you're gonna have a lot of folks looking for She-Hulk, and I just try to lock your doors at night as the best you can. Do we have a ideal casting choice? I mean, look, if you don't think Tom Holland is your Nathan Drake, then I don't know what to tell you other than apologies, because it does look like we're going to get more Uncharted starring Tom Holland. Is there a person out there, though, that either one of y'all thought, oh, this should have been Nathan Drake, perfect age, perfect look? I'll start with you, Grace.
Well, he has some problems on social media these days, but I guess I would go with Chris Pratt, who a lot of people for a while wanted to be Indiana Jones. You know, I think you would want to get as close to Indiana Jones as possible, because that's what I think the game was trying to do. So I think maybe I'd pick him.
Nick, do you have anyone in the dugout you want to call up to the plate for Nathan Drake?
Well, as I said, not now. I always thought that Bradley Cooper, let's say about Bradley Cooper, maybe about 6 years ago, would have been really well cast. I think he has the right sort of attitude and the right look. But Chris Pratt is someone who's much more apt to be in a project like this, where he's doing a lot of running around green screens and whatnot and fighting things. And, you know, it's very, because there is a very similar vibe between this and, say, the Jurassic Park movies. I mean, minus obviously the dinosaurs, but that sort of adventuring, that sort of, you know, running, leaping, tumbling, finding keys and, you know, unlocking doors and all that stuff is certainly in his wheelhouse. But look, Tom Holland is going to work. I think by the time you get a sequel, he'll be, you know, a few years older. He'll probably finally look a little bit older, and people will have already accepted him. So, you know, all things considered, look, as somebody who loves the Resident Evil video games, Mila Jovovich was never accurately cast, and yet she wound up being better than if you had done, you know, a game specific or game faithful adaptation, as we just saw with Welcome to Raccoon City, which did something that was much more fixated on fidelity and doesn't work at all.
Yeah, one could say that you have Tom Holland, who is sort of setting up his own Spider-Man retirement home nest egg with the Uncharted movies, because as soon as you're too old to play a high schooler or maybe a college student, Peter Parker, now you can just go right into more treasure hunting adventures with Uncharted. So if we separate it from the video game a little bit, we just look at the actual film and the story that it was telling. I saw some critics say that they thought the movie was slow, that there were some big action pieces, but then there's just a whole lot of sort of molasses in the middle. I never felt that, Grace. I kind of like the unfolding of solving a giant riddle that spans the globe. I'm also, by my own admission, a complete idiot when it comes to figuring out puzzles in movies or I never know who the killer is until they tell me. Do you find this movie to be like a fun adventure throughout, or did you just kind of see that it was more hit or miss depending on what scene it was?
I thought it lagged a little bit when they were underground, you know, in Spain with the Papa John stuff. I mean, Papa John stuff woke it up. But they were, I think, underground for just like a little bit too long. We got to the point where you were like, all right, come on, I get it already. You know, like I think a key to a movie like this is that it moves fast. It moves from location to location. So I think I think a little bit with the obstacle course in, you know, Nathan Drake's apartment, that maybe went on a little bit too long. You know, you were like, why are we wasting this time? As you said, Mark, I totally believe that he would be able to do this. I didn't need them to be like, but he's been practicing, so don't worry about it, you know? So those moments, I thought the movie was a little slow, and that's what kept it from being as professional as, say, a Mummy Indiana Jones wannabe movie. But I think it's right up there. I think it's like, I prefer it to National Treasure, which I know is a lot of people's favorite.
I want to sort of compare this to the other movies, not just what we've mentioned already with your Indiana Joneses, The Mummy, National Treasure, but another video game property that has some debate as to whether it was successful or not, but that would be the reboot of Tomb Raider. You can even go back to the original Tomb Raiders with Angelina Jolie. Do you see this as a positive build on what we got with Tomb Raider? Was this a pale imitation of Tomb Raider to you?
That's interesting. That's a good comparison. I liked the most recent Tomb Raider. I thought it had potential, but I think it was a little too low key. And I think it waited too long to become the Lara Croft that everybody knows and loves. You know, they made that classic Hollywood mistake of the last scene, she becomes that character, and then they're like, maybe we'll get a sequel, and you're like, you should have just made a movie like that. And I think that luckily, at least, even if he doesn't look like Nathan Drake, he certainly was doing Nathan Drake things. I think that this is like somewhere in between. I think that as good as I'm not sure. You know, Tom Holland has this. I think that the first Tomb Raider did really well because of Angelina Jolie's star power. So I guess that is kind of the same situation here. And she really wasn't a great Lara Croft based on the games. You know, she was basically just playing British Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, and we were so new back then. We were such babes in the woods with video game adaptations. Hey, it's the video game, and now it's come to life. And yeah, these are all going to be great, great movies. If you look at this in terms of Tomb Raider, to Grace's point, Nick, it did wait a while, and it pulled that Ridley Scott Robin Hood trick where it's like, we're going to watch this through an entire movie just to find out that now we can start the Robin Hood adventures. I did like, and that's probably why I prefer this version of Uncharted to Alicia Vikander's Tomb Raider, is that at least we got Nathan Drake and Sully like right off the bat, as opposed to waiting for that to manifest throughout the movie.
Yeah, again, it's a matter of, not wasting a lot of time. I don't think the movie wastes a lot of time with tons of backstory. I mean, even the flashback with the brother, that's the one moment I think when you wish the movie would just get on with it, because you barely care. The Tomb Raider games, I would say, have even less sort of character depth and depth in general than the Uncharted games, which were sort of more specifically about telling stories. They were much more based around the characters themselves, about the drama and the narrative in those games. And so there's more to work with right off the bat. I mean, Tomb Raider, she's this beautiful looking woman who goes into tombs and finds things. And that was basically the beginning and the end of it. Here, the movie does give you what you want, insofar as it does the things the game, promises. I just think, maybe with a more accomplished director or screenwriter, we could have had something even better.
Yeah, I'm way too lazy to ever want to write a movie, much less direct a movie. But I will say, I found the backstory to be a little too long-winded. I get that we're going for a Spielbergian sort of, hey, we'll look at these little kids or adventures. They're going to grow up to be something. But then, Grace, I did notice why we had to spend so much time seeing that they were at this boys' home run by nuns is because Tom Holland, Indiana Jones is afraid of snakes. Nathan Drake is apparently afraid of nuns. And so I got that was a reference to Indiana Jones, nuns, why is it always got to be nuns? And then we make 9 more, much more overt nods to Indiana Jones. So I did find that to be playful. Did you like the continuous nods to franchises past that have also done treasure hunting epics, or did you find it a little, okay, we get it, let's get on with this movie?
No, I thought it was cute. I thought it was, I was surprised that they went to other studios. Like usually a studio will only do in-studio references. But I guess, Sony and Disney are getting along very well these days. But like they did the Jack Sparrow call out. I was like, oh, wow, I'm surprised you would reference another big successful franchise. Although, as I said in my review, to me at that point, Tom Holland looked like Peter Pan on the ship at the bow, because he just has this Peter Pan quality, and he even hops around like Peter Pan. I felt like, when Peter Pan fights Captain Hook and he's like in the air all the time. I mean, to me, a lot of what made this movie work was the jokes, and then also Tom Holland's agility. Like, like there when he's in the bar at the rave, and he, kind of like jumps through like that closing door behind the bar at the last minute. Like he was able to do all this like parkour stuff himself. And you see a lot of actors doing that these days, at least big movie stars. And I thought that was like really cool. I was like, oh wow, I think he actually did that. That was neat.
Yeah, it's a good note for all you young globe-trotting treasure enthusiasts is if you're at a rave and there's people looking for you, just feel the music. Just get in that groove, just start dancing, and it's going to buy you all the time you need. Nick, I want your take on where we go from here, where as far as Uncharted goes, because I want to have a larger conversation in a minute about video game movies in general. But just with Uncharted, it does feel like this is a hugely successful movie for this year, and especially the times that we live in. So I think we will get more Uncharted films. Where do you want them to go? Where can we go that will improve upon this foundation for you?
Well, I'm sure we're going to get more now, because even though the movie is going, its box office, I think, is going to be hampered by the fact that we've got the Batman coming up in whatever it is, a week and a half or so. But it's still going to wind up being generally profitable. And Sony is going to want to stay in business with Tom Holland, who is obviously, doing quite well for them. With a new movie, I mean, I think the one question is whether or not you can now get a story that is maybe as compelling to audiences as your star is. I think here, as I said, they played it very safe, and they hit a lot of notes that are meant to be familiar. And I think you can still do that with a sequel, but do it in a more sort of daring and elaborate way, whether that means going to more unique locales, whether it means coming up with a basic plot hook that's more interesting than just there's some hidden gold somewhere and we've got to find it, and oh, here's a treasure map, and we're going to sort of play the Goonies game here. I think there's more to be done even with a franchise like this, but you probably now can get whoever you want to direct it, save for the top tier people, because the franchise is already established. You're probably going to put more money behind it. Tom Holland is looking like a really bankable star at the moment. And you saw they did the same thing with Venom, that Ruben Fleischer did the first Venom, and they got somebody else to do the second one. With
but that turned out, I think, really poorly. I think that it was a mistake to get rid of Ruben Fleischer for the second Venom. Andy Serkis just wasn't able to deliver the same type of movie, and I think it just fell flat. So I would actually keep Ruben Fleischer, but I think the important thing to remember is this movie was filmed during a pandemic, with Spain substituting for every foreign locale. So now, with the pandemic getting a little better, I think they could really do a globe-trotting adventure. And I would like to see them really lean into the Holland-Wahlberg chemistry, just quips, wall-to-wall quips.
Yeah, but so neither one of you are saying, and Nick, you want to see more exotic locations. You're not saying we go to space yet, right? That's like the fourth movie.
Yeah, we can probably hold off on that for a couple. But yeah, and as to Grace's point, I guess my feeling is that Ruben Fleischer has now made 2 movies in a row that have been very successful. And I think in both cases, they've been pretty sloppy. I'm not going to defend the second Venom per se, but I think the first Venom is a sloppy movie and works despite Ruben Fleischer. And I think this movie works despite him too. The first one benefits from Venom being an interesting character and having Tom Hardy, and this one benefits from really, really fortuitous timing. As I said, this movie opens 6 months from now. I don't believe it does the same business. People are on a Tom Holland high, and there's no other alternative at the box office.
Well, I'm just saying, Venom was a huge surprise success in Uncharted, and what's the same about both those movies? Ruben Fleischer.
That's
True. Although
his agent, that's what I would say. I'd be like,
true. Although I would only say that I don't think this is going to be a huge hit. This movie is going to top out at what, 90 million, 100 million. That's nice. It's not a major hit except in this environment. It's not. I think they need to. By the time they make a sequel, hopefully the world has recovered some. They're going to have to make something more successful than this one.
And I will say, keep your eyes on the worldwide box office too, because to date, $139 million. And so we'll see, with a adventure that spans the earth like this one, could have some international appeal as well. And so we'll see if that gets reflected in the box office. If nothing else, if you go to see the Batman and you can't get a ticket because it's already sold out, I'd say Uncharted, not a bad backup quarterback to have in your stable. So we mentioned Venom because of the shared DNA with the director Ruben Fleischer, but Venom is just one in the many, many comic book movies you can at least argue was good or bad. And we've had many great comic book films in the last decade, but we haven't had that with video game adaptations. There's been 48 video game adaptations into film so far in the history of Hollywood, 4 of them are fresh. 4 of them are fresh, and one of them is Angry Birds 2. And much to my chagrin, the greatest Paul Anderson as a director is not the guy who made Licorice Pizza. It's the guy who did Mortal Kombat, and that movie isn't even fresh from 1995. And so Uncharted doesn't appear to be a fresh movie. It's going to be rotten on the Tomatometer. So what are we doing wrong here, Nick? What do we need to rectify with these video game adaptations? We've been talking about this for so long. Why can't we get it right?
Well, we have been talking about it forever, and I think there's a point at which we have to accept that video games in general, don't really lend themselves to great adaptations because I think the main hook of video games have to do with interactivity. And their stories, the depth of character and of stories and of the worlds are deliberately secondary in games to the interactive element, which obviously can't be duplicated here. Now, there still should be a better track record because you have enough iconic characters from video games and enough iconic series that people should have been able to do better. But I think people have often fallen back on that too easily and therefore figured that the property alone would sell something, and it hasn't worked. I think even when you get an illustrious cast and director, like, even Assassin's Creed from a few years ago, which just totally does not work despite a lot of talent and a lot of money and effort put behind it. To my mind, I would like people to take even bigger risks, such as I brought up earlier, Resident Evil, where Paul Anderson, really didn't care so much about whether or not you thought this felt like the original Resident Evil game. In fact, he sort of deliberately makes sure it doesn't feel that way in a lot of different respects. And as a result, you can carve out your own identity. And even though none of those movies were on their own, a Titanic blockbuster, the fact that we had 6 or 7 of them speaks to the fact that he tapped into something that almost no other video game adaptations have, with a few exceptions here and there. And certainly Angry Birds shows that some games are better suited to certain sort of fields here. I mean, animation and Angry Birds makes sense. With something like this, we'll see if they can build on this or if we have another Lara Croft situation where the first one is generally sort of liked and then it falls off a cliff because they don't know where to go.
Yeah, Grace, where are you with the current state of comic book movies versus video game adaptations? We've done it with comic book films. What's the hang up with video game adaptations? Or have we already turned the corner because you were a fan of Uncharted?
Well, I think if you take Marvel movies out of the equation, I think comic book movies are having a problem too, a lot of them. I think the issue is that, you have talent that comes in to work on these movies that isn't a fan of the source material. The need to put their own stamp on it from, there's tons of people who work on a movie and everyone has an idea of how they can make the product better. I think if you do something that's really, really faithful, I think that it could work. I think the other problem is that video games are so close to movies at this point that it's a little bit like, when you adapt anything else, it's different. It's a different medium. But with video games, it's almost like, what are you going to do? Just remake the cutscenes? I think that becomes a little bit complex too. And there's like a lot of butting heads between the video game industry and the movie industry. The video game industry pulls in more money than the movies.
Yeah, I mean, the opening weekend, if you will, for video game sales, I mean, I've seen some of the numbers, and I'll throw Halo in there too. It's unbelievable business that they continue to do. Speaking of Halo, there's a Halo TV series coming out, folks. And you want to talk about projects that we thought were just on the shelf in development hell forever. Halo is right at the top of the list as well. Grace, we're getting a Halo TV show. Is that the next video game property that you're really looking forward to? Well, what is on the horizon for you as far as video game adaptations into some sort of either cinema or streaming?
Well, yeah, totally. I think next up is Sonic. People have pointed out we've gotten 2 Sonic movies during the pandemic. Sonic is really moving. But I agree. Halo is the next big video game to see if that can work. But already we're seeing some complaints about casting. And also that, they changed stuff from the game. They changed, I forget what the name of the hologram character is. They've changed that, the look of that. And then also they said they're telling a story within the Halo world, but it's not from any of the games. So that's risky because people might not like the story that they're telling. And also it's on a streaming service that I think has yet to really break through. It's not like a slam dunk with getting eyes on it. But yeah, Halo is definitely, if anything's going to work, it's going to be Halo.
It would be nice to see a Jeep zooming around Blood Gulch just for us old-time Xbox players once or twice. Nick, is Halo the one for you that you're pinning your hopes on? Because as a gamer yourself, at least you have a history playing them. What is the one that you're like, okay, now you are the savior. You're the one that's going to bring balance to the world of video game adaptations.
Well, I don't know if there's one. I do think that Halo is obviously the next big one. And as you said, the fact that it's had such a long production history as well, with so many illustrious names attached at one point, it's going to be interesting to see whether they can, again, take a game that has a really sort of iconic look and feel and style to it, that also riffed on classic sci-fi movies, and come up with an original story that can really sustain it. Because Halo's story, you know, while I think certainly engaging, is sort of just the skeleton that allows you to then explore this world on your own and to have all of these major battles. They obviously need more of that to prop up a long, you know, TV series here. To my mind, the one I'm more excited about is, I think, the one that a lot of people are, which is The Last of Us. And you know, that's the one where they're really putting in, I think, the right amount of effort. They have the right property, because that's really a game that is narratively based and that does have some real character meat on its bones, while also giving you a lot of genre stuff and a lot of opportunities for action. They can stick to the games relatively closely while also fleshing them out. I mean, if you just adapted the two games, you would have seasons worth of material without having to deviate too far.
So there's been a lot said about Uncharted, about the movie, about video game adaptations, about nods to great swashbuckling adventure films of the past. And it's been a rollicking conversation. So I want to leave here today with one final question to Grace and to Nick. Video games can be played for kids ages 1 to 92. There isn't an age range anymore. But if I was to go back to your childhood and say, hey, what's your favorite video game that you want to become a movie? Has it already happened, or are you still waiting for that game? For me, I'm a Genesis kid. I want Golden Axe. Give me a Golden Axe. We kind of got it with Lord of the Rings a little bit, but I think there's a lot more to have in the world of Golden Axe. So that would be mine. Grace Randolph, what is your video game movie that you just need to see made and done right?
Well, I'm not a big gamer, but I think a game that I've been following over the past few years is Mortal Kombat. And they got tantalizingly close with some scenes, like with the last one, you know. So I would love to see that done right. And I think that it showed the audience is just really primed for a good movie. Because I remember everybody tweeting when that movie dropped on HBO Max. Everybody really was looking forward to it. So there's an audience waiting there for that kind of movie.
And maybe we will get a Mortal Kombat 2 that is indeed, as the video game would imply, toasty. Nick, final word on video game movies goes to you. What is the game that Nick a few years ago might have been playing, or a few decades ago was gaming with and said, oh, I can't wait for this to be a movie one day?
Yeah, it would be a few decades. I think the one property that's sitting there that has real potential is Castlevania. I think
that's an animated series.
Yeah. Well, the Netflix animated series has been very successful, but I think there's something there for a larger universe. And that really would lend itself to sort of an original take on familiar material. And so they just need somebody who's willing to put the effort in and not make another Van Helsing. And if we can get that, I mean, I think Castlevania is sitting right there waiting for people.
On that note, you reminded me, I guess I'm really excited to see what Arcane does with its second season, because that just came out of nowhere and I think changed the game, not just for video game adaptations, but just animation. It was incredible.
And, you know, as one of the great Tetris players of all time, Game Boy Division, I am looking forward to that trilogy of movies that we may or may not be having. Again, I don't know what the story is, but I am one of the few that will sit there and be captivated, waiting for that long piece to come so we can knock a Tetris out just in the nick of time. Well, that is about all we have for here today on the After Show, talking all things Uncharted. I want to thank my incredible, esteemed panel of talent. First, Grace Randolph. We've gotten to have many great movie conversations over the years. You're still hosting Beyond the Trailer. So many great things in your world. Where can all the kids out there find you?
come on over. I'm here on YouTube. I'm Beyond the Trailer. And then also I'm very active on Twitter. So tweet me.
And Nick Schager, it was great to connect with you finally after following your work in the Daily Beast for so long. Where can all the kids go find you? Did you do the Twitter? Do you do the TikTok? Are we doing peacemaker dances? What's going on in your world, sir?
Yeah, you won't find me on TikTok. I'm a little past the age cutoff for that, I think. But you can find me on Twitter at @nschager, and you can find me at the Daily Beast, where I'm constantly writing.
Two great film minds divided on Uncharted. Grace thinks it's fresh. Nick thinks it's rotten. It is currently rotten on the Tomatometer, 40%, but the audience score is a very fresh 90%. So thanks to our guest here for joining us. Thanks to the real host of the show, Jacqueline Coley, for letting me barge in and talk about the Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg film that is doing good business at the box office for now. We'll see if that Bruce guy from Gotham has anything to say about that. So for the entire team here at Rotten Tomatoes, I'll give our esteemed engineer, Ed, a shout out as well. Thank you, Ed, for charting our course through this hour. And thanks to everybody for watching us here on the RT After Show. I am merely Mark Ellis, and we'll see you next time here at Rotten Tomatoes.